He was the smiling neighborhood contractor, a respected community leader. He hosted barbecues, took photos with politicians, and dressed as Pogo the Clown to entertain children at birthday parties. But beneath the costume, under his home, were the rotting bodies of more than 20 boys. John Wayne Gacy buried at least 29 young men. Some he strangled while laughing. Others, he kept alive, just long enough to suffer. The scariest part? He looked just like everyone else. But the real horror isn't just in what he did, it's in how long he got away with it. If you think you know this case, think again. Stick around, hit subscribe, and let's break down one of the most horrifying double lives in American criminal history. John Wayne Gacy was the kind of man people trusted. Born in 1942 in Chicago, he grew up in a working-class home with an alcoholic, abusive father, the kind of man who beat him for playing with dolls or walking too softly. He grew up desperate for male approval. In his early 20s, he married into a wealthy family and became the manager of 3 KFC restaurants in Iowa. But in 1968, the mask slipped for the first time. Gacy was convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. He served only 18 months in prison. And when he got out, he moved to Chicago. His record was concealed, allowing him to start fresh, unnoticed. The neighborhood had no idea what had just moved in. By his mid-30s, Gacy had become a respected figure in his community. He ran a successful construction company and mingled with politicians. He even posed for a photo with First Lady Rosalynn Carter while wearing a Secret Service pin, which he later confessed to faking. Neighbors called him generous. He'd shovel driveways in the winter, host lively barbecues in the summer, and dressed as a clown bringing balloons to children's parties. No one suspected that behind his friendly demeanor, he was secretly orchestrating one of the most methodical killing sprees in American history. His modest suburban home at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue held a terrifying secret. In his crawl space, a dark, cramped trench beneath the floor, he buried victim after victim. What made Gacy so terrifying wasn't just his violence. It was his ability to compartmentalize. By day, he was the sociable businessman. By night, he cruised for vulnerable teenage boys, promising work, rides, or a safe place. Instead, he'd lure them to his home in Norwood Park. Some never even made it out of his car. Gacy had a chillingly precise method he called the rope trick. He'd convince his victims to try on handcuffs as part of a clown performance, promising an easy escape. Instead, he'd quickly tighten the rope into a deadly tourniquet. It was fast, precise, cold. Most victims were between 14 and 22. Many were runaways, others from broken homes, forgotten by society. And Gacy relied on this neglect, believing no one would come looking. Neighbors would hear strange banging beneath the house at night. One even reported the smell of death wafting from his vents. But Gacy always had an explanation. It was just old plumbing, he said. He didn't operate in a frenzy, he was organized, methodical. And that's why he was so deadly. He once told investigators, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." Gacy wasn't a loner. He had friends, business partners, a social calendar. So how did a man with a full public life keep 29 decomposing corpses beneath his house? Was it society's failure to take missing boys seriously? How many of his victims could have been saved if someone had simply looked a little closer? He also told investigators, "A dead body doesn't mean anything to me." And he meant it. Over 6 years, boys disappeared, one after another. But the victims weren't always missed. In many cases, police never investigated deeper. Gacy even told parents their sons had stolen from him and ran away. And because he was a well-known face in the neighborhood, who'd ever accuse him? Not the police. Not his neighbors. Not even the parents. Yet despite his outwardly normal life, things eventually started to unravel. One boy disappeared after a job interview with Gacy. Another was last seen entering his car. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Piest vanished. He was last seen at a pharmacy, telling his mother he had a job lead with a contractor, a man named John Gacy. When Robert didn't come home that night, his mother panicked. She knew something was wrong. She gave the police a name. And unlike earlier cases, this time, investigators actually listened. Des Plaines police officer Lieutenant Joseph Kozenzak led the investigation. He paid Gacy a visit and immediately sensed something was off. Gacy was overly confident. Charming, but too rehearsed. And more importantly, he refused to let officers search his home. Red flag. Over the following days, police tailed Gacy 24/7. They saw him growing agitated, slipping. One night, Gacy invited the surveillance team into a restaurant, offering them dinner. Another time, he handed them a bag of weed, as if daring them to arrest him. But they waited, needing concrete proof to get a warrant. Police obtained a limited search warrant and finally entered Gacy's home. Inside, they found a strange smell coming from the floor vents. Several suspicious items. Driver's license that didn't belong to Gacy. Clothing that didn't fit him. Pornographic materials involving young men. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. They needed something indisputable, something that would legally justify tearing up the floors. And soon, they got it. By December 21st, Gacy knew it was over. He invited his lawyer and confessed. In a chilling, matter-of-fact tone, he described killing more than 30 boys, most of whom were buried beneath his house. Others? He dumped into the Des Plaines River. He drew maps. Recalled names. Smiled at moments. The detectives were stunned. Gacy didn't seem broken. He seemed relieved. Police entered the crawl space. The smell hit first. Then came the discovery of body after body, shallow graves stacked across one another, bones tangled in the dirt. Some were so badly decomposed they could only be identified by dental records. Some, not at all. In total, 29 bodies were recovered from beneath Gacy's house. 4 more were pulled from nearby rivers. 8 victims remain unidentified to this day. Chicago was horrified. The smiling clown, the friendly neighborhood volunteer, was now America's most infamous serial killer. Media dubbed him the Killer Clown. But behind the headlines was something even darker. How many boys died simply because no one believed they were missing? How many families were ignored because the victims were poor, gay, or considered runaways? John Wayne Gacy was caught. But the silence that let him operate for years? That came from the system itself. By the time authorities unearthed the last remains from beneath his house, John Wayne Gacy had confessed to 33 murders. America was in shock. But the question everyone was now asking wasn't just, how did he do it? It was, what kind of person could live this double life, and sleep at night? Psychologists called him a textbook sociopath. No empathy. No guilt. No remorse. He divided his life into compartments: John the businessman, Gacy the killer, Pogo the clown. In interviews, he denied everything. Even after confessing to 33 murders, Gacy later claimed the police fabricated the evidence, saying, "I had nothing to do with it. The crawl space was already like that when I moved in." He blamed everyone but himself. His employees. The victims. The police. And said he was only running a burial service. He even sued his defense attorney for incompetence, a man who had literally watched him draw maps of his victims under the house. To Gacy, the truth was just another tool. Something to bend. Something to control. The trial began in 1980 and lasted 5 weeks. Jurors heard graphic testimony. crime scene photos, and chilling confessions. The defense argued Gacy was insane. The prosecution argued he was evil, and fully aware of every act. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of murder. Sentence: death. But it would take 14 years for that sentence to be carried out. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. Outside the prison, crowds gathered. Some held signs that read, "No tears for the clown." Others wore party hats and blew kazoos. His final words? "Kiss my ass." Even in death, Gacy showed no remorse. But his crimes left a scar on the American psyche, a warning that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they throw the neighborhood cookout. Gacy's story is more than just horror. It's a case study in systemic failure. How background checks missed his history of sexual abuse. How authorities ignored missing persons reports. To this day, 8 victims remain unnamed, buried under the legacy of a man who believed he could outsmart everyone. His case led to reforms in law enforcement collaboration, missing persons tracking, background checks for contractors and entertainers. But even decades later, people are still asking, how many other Gacys went unnoticed? And how close might they be? What do you think was the most terrifying part of John Wayne Gacy's story? The crimes? The mask he wore? Or society's willingness to overlook him? And most haunting of all, how many predators today are still hiding behind a similar mask? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. If you made it this far, your mind is like mine, you don't turn away from darkness. You seek to understand it. Hit subscribe to join this community of truth seekers. Tap like if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, not buried. And share this with someone who still thinks monsters exist only in the movies. This isn't fiction. It's real. And it happened beneath an ordinary suburban house.